Oh, yeah. That's what we're talking about. It's episode 113 here on Height Drop. We have Jereme Sanders as today's guest in studio. It was really cool to have him in town and get to catch up in the flesh. He has just so many wild stories, and we take the whole journey of how he got in through parkour and kind of evolved as a man from a boy and everything in between. And he's just had a really wild and was really open with his journey through life. And that was like so cool. He's a legend, just a living legend in the community, especially, you know, in my generation. We know so few people that are still left in the game sometimes. And he's one of the names that's just been around, you know, since the beginning for me. So much love and much respect to Jereme Sanders. I hope you guys dig this episode as much as I did. So cool. I'll see you at the end of the episode. All right, here we go.
You turned into Batman for a second.
This is my podcasting voice. Yeah, you got to get that low drop, octave lower than normal.
Okay, I see.
That's how you soothe the listener. Thank you for coming on, man.
Yeah,
Jereme
dude.
Sanders in the building.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brandon.
What a rare occurrence.
Yeah, that is. I'm not usually on this side of the world, but yeah, happy to be here. Happy to see you. It was really cool to be able to get to see, you know, some of the young guns again, the try hard people and Max. So really, yeah, thanks for having me, honestly.
I couldn't say no when I saw that you were in town. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, the knife against you didn't help either, right? Like, you can't say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to have you on the podcast.
There's a bomb strapped to underneath his tank top.
Yeah.
There's actually suicide vest, and he's threatening me. Yeah, man. Well, you were about to tell me a funny story, so go right into it, I guess, because you were saying, who's in Merm? And I was like, well, it was me, Dylan, and Knox.
Yeah.
There was everyone that was kind of in there, but that was like who was on the LLC.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said that you had some Merm shorts, and they
Yeah,
had a
so
devastating end.
It was
Yes.
horrible and very, like, not a fitting demise. But, you know, Merm was dope back in the day. It was super cool. Your guys' stuff, the videos. What was that one video in the gym?
There was a shoot video and a slam video.
Yeah, both of them. The shoot and the slam video. Super iconic. But, yeah, I love the shorts because they were, like, one of the only, like, kind of like basketball style, like, shorts going on, like, not cotton, whatever, you know, things.
Fine
And,
mesh.
Yeah,
The finest.
The fine mesh, exactly. And great for Texas training, great for Dubai training. And anyway, one of my friends, what I lived with, Pedro, you bastard, I love you. But there's lots of washers overseas, but there's not many dryers, and so the clothes were washed but not dried. And for some reason, he just had to train with the Merm shorts that day. And in his brain, even though he's way smarter than me and an engineer and can like build dams and buildings and stuff like that, he thought it would be cool to like just put the Merm shorts in a frying pan for a little bit to dry them. And then he proceeded.
Makes sense.
And then he proceeded to burn a bunch of holes into the Merm shorts.
Cooked.
And and you could wear them if you like. No, you couldn't wear them. They were done. That's how they ended, and I was really sad for a while.
Well, damn, dude, I'm honored in a way that you felt saddened by the loss of this garment that we created as a team. But yeah, sorry to hear that. It's a brutal end. Just getting cooked alive. My Merm shorts I burned at Burning Man.
Oh, okay.
So that was another pair that got burned. I don't know how many pairs got burned.
Yeah, that's a good
if you have a
question.
Merm short out there that got burned, tell us your story. We need to know.
Yeah, definitely. Nice.
So I guess it would behoove me to just have you maybe tell your story a little bit for anyone who's listening that doesn't know who you are. You're obviously a legend among the generation that I come from, and everyone knows who you are. But, you know, there's a lot of new people out there, and like everyone, you know, we've seen the turnover of generation to generation. It's just crazy now. And so like, I don't expect anyone to know me or any of my guests anymore. And well, how could they? There's just so much out there. But you've done a lot of things. And so even for me, it's going to be a good reminder of your journey and just how you got into parkour a little bit, just, you know, or just your whole life story. Let's just start from when were you born and all that. Yeah. That was your first memory, I think.
Oh man. Yeah, we'll start kind of parkour, and then as we warm up, we can go into some life stuff. But Yeah, so I started training around 2003. I my first like parkour thing that I saw was Ripley's Believe It or Not, and it was the Yamakaze just like kind of doing their thing.
My first thing too.
Yeah, it was classic. And as soon as I saw that, it was like, yep, got to go do Yamakaze. So we didn't know parkour or freerunning or art de déplacement or anything like that. Me and then I got one of my other friends, Vinny, and we were just doing Yamakaze for like a year or something. We just jump around, do.
And where were you growing up? Or where was
San
this?
Antonio, yeah.
San Antonio.
So,
Okay.
yeah, San Antonio.
San Antonio, baby.
Yeah, so I was born in California, raised mostly in San Antonio. We kind of moved around up to that point, but yeah, so I was around 13 when I started, and obviously, as is that time, there was no YouTube, there was no anything, and we just had what we saw. We started doing that. Eventually, saw like the Nike Presto ad, like I think it was like the Angry Chicken or like.
Mm-hmm.
There was also like the scary cat one. I think it was the angry chicken one I saw though. And then at the bottom it was like professional free runner. And then through that I found parkour.net and then also urban free flow. And then that's when I was like, oh, okay, we're doing like parkour, or that's what we started calling it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean it was all right. I feel like at the beginning of like the forum days, there was a lot going on, but there also wasn't that much going on. I mean, like the scene was like, I don't like, I don't remember doing a step vault until like years later. We were like,
What were you doing?
I mean, I think it was like side vaults, and it was like jumping off the highest thing you could, and
Fuck
like
yeah.
Kong vaults, and then just flips mostly.
Oh man.
Some reverse vaults too. I think my biggest inspiration, which I finally knew it was like parkour and not Yamakasi, was what was their group? The Cambridge Tracers, TCT.
Oh, yeah.
So like Jin and Owen, I think, like, and then shortly after, that's when Barefoot guy's not barefoot anymore, but I can't remember
Phil
his name.
Doyle.
Thank you. Phil Doyle came from that whole area.
Mm-hmm.
But like I remember those guys when I first started seeing them, they had like dope reverse vaults and all things like that. And I know there was a lot of like inspiration from there once like through Google video, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Videos and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean that's kind of how things got started, and as is the way, it was just like tons of trial and error. I remember like rolling my ankles like all the time, and you're 13, so you bounce back just fine. And I was just like a super weak gamer, kind of like nerdy kid, so I didn't really have any like physical base to like start from. I did have a little bit of a martial arts background, like maybe like up to 6 months before I found parkour, but like that was the gist of it. But I think as a lot of people that are into it, they're already kind of like doing parkour stuff. I remember like long time ago seeing like Max post like a video of him or a picture of him as a little kid jumping off like an electrical box. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's just what kids
Kids
do.
play, right?
Exactly.
And like
So I
they
was
use
already,
their bodies.
Yeah.
And that's arguably a definition for parkour right there.
Yeah. 100%. So even before I was doing parkour, I was already like jumping off roofs and things like that. But it definitely gave
even
like
as a nerdy gamer kid, or not nerdy, weak gamer kid.
Yeah, exactly.
So like you had an interest in it, just drawing you in. Okay, I want to expand on that maybe a little later,
you're
but
good. Yeah, so I mean that was Prince of Persia, like Assassin's
okay,
Creed.
so some of the games you're playing,
yeah,
even, drawing you in.
like
When you said you were studying, it was jujitsu, Japanese jujitsu, right? Is that where you first started? A little bit before parkour, and that's obviously a pretty established traditional martial art, or at least in comparison with parkour.
Oh yeah.
I'm a little curious, like what about you made like yourself? You were interested in this very established kind of thing, or at least kind of ancient, a little bit niche, to another niche, I guess, but a very new, budding, kind of unknown thing. Do you remember like seeing it that way, or why?
Sadly or funnily or whatever, I think it still ties back into video games. So
nice.
like if we were to go into like my past, I like grew up in super poor environment, and like around my family there was like lots of drugs and like these kind of like bad influences. And I think as a kid it was like there was two things that were like my go-to, not necessarily my maybe coping mechanisms or escapes from this environment that was not, as a kid that healthy for me, right? And first was like exploring the outside, like the outdoors. So like I was born in California. One of my first memories is living in Idlewild, and there's like beautiful pine trees, mountains, and snow. And I just remember like, wandering around, like being a kid or whatever. And this, like, because of that, I think there was always this connection with just like being outside, exploring my environment, and like, honestly, because I didn't necessarily have that many good human influences, I was quite shy and not really that interested in interacting with people. So it was like actually a challenge for me as I started like, running my own business and actually being like in a worldwide parkour community and at least a national one, going to jams and things like that to like learn how to like, the socially inept parkour person is definitely not a uncommon thing, right? Because it's already a niche thing.
There's oh boy, it's like the earlier you go back, the more you're likely you are to run into like the awkward social, like, I mean, I'm from an era where I think there was a lot of that still, and I'm like kind of like a half or a full generation after you, I would say. And obviously it still continues. Like we're not. Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a fringe sport. It's going to attract some fringe folks, which is like the beauty of it in a way, but also, I mean, everyone has to learn that to a degree. But yeah, if you don't have very good role models, or if you don't have any, examples of how to do it, it can be really a struggle to learn those things.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think future generations are going to naturally like start to be better at it as it gets like more popular and as the community grows, right? Because like when I started, I think the only other people training in Texas at the same time as me were the Tap Brothers, and I'm a 13-year-old kid. They're like a 6-hour drive away in Dallas. Like I didn't even know they existed probably until I was like 15 or 16. You know what I mean? And then we didn't train till probably like 16 years old or something like that. So I think doing this fringe thing, as you said, that had like no real people, feeling like you're kind of like trailblazing it. One, there's not really a comparison to go off of. Two, there's not like an economy or a community to like teach you how to act or anything like that, you know what I mean? So, but nowadays I feel like since there is at least something going on everywhere, most likely there's a community to jump into, and there's like people to show like, yeah, this is how like parkour people act, or this is like, what we do. But so like environmental exploration, I guess I'll say, like wandering, and then video games were like my things that I always went to just in my youth. So the jiu-jitsu thing, funnily enough, was the video game. It came from a video game. I remember seeing like a ninja in, I think it was Virtua Fighter, and and back when video games had like booklets to see all the things.
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
Exactly. He was like, it showed everybody's martial arts style, and his martial arts style was Japanese jiu-jitsu. And then just by happenstance, we were actually going to go eat at a Japanese restaurant with my family, my mom and my brother. And we got lost, but we ended up getting in there, and in the shopping center, had Japanese jiu-jitsu. And like you see karate places everywhere, taekwondo, even like hapkido, but that was like the first like, Japanese jiu-jitsu place I saw, and I was like immediately knew like, okay, I got to try like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I ended up sticking with it for the better part of 10 years. It also introduced me into like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which is like way more popular and a cool sport, as well as like, Muay Thai. And I mean, that like really, I think, opened the floodgates into like, I guess not only trusting other people, but exploring, what the world has out there as far as like, these types of, movements and disciplines and all that kind of stuff.
And did parkour like ignite any, you're like, how did they compare as you, because it sounds like you're learning very in parallel a little bit. What do you notice about that and brought, because this is actually half a martial arts podcast. I don't know if you knew this.
Oh.
But there's a theme going on, because I'm a big nerd about martial arts, even though I don't practice them as much as I probably should to be this much of a nerd. But I just really like, I got into it through the UFC and things, but I'm curious, like, how did they compare? That's always been like a interesting question for me, is like, is parkour martial art? And if so, how much?
Yeah, I think, like, that's the kind of the cool thing about parkour, and especially like the way you learned it, we all learned it, is like kind of in a viral nature, you know what I mean? So like when I found parkour, like you found parkour in the other world, we had no idea what, you know, that each other even existed in that moment, or what our first initial thing was. And we take our entire life experience and then like find this thing that we start training, and we apply like our own spin on what it is, right? You know, so like, but with martial arts, especially like something like Japanese jiu-jitsu, it's like, okay, I know where my master trained, I know who he trained under, and and you know, there's that lineage, right? And especially with something like that, even like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I know is real big into that. So I think because of the things I was interested in, which was martial arts and stuff like that, I totally took it into that kind of martial way. Maybe the Yamakasi thing affected it too, but not really, because like whenever it's, you know, a bit like a commercial bit or a TV spot, it's not like they're showing you like, you guys should be conditioning and doing all these kinds of things, you know. They're just showing the cool stuff, the building jumps and all that crazy stuff. So yeah, I think personally there's a positive and a negative aspect of it. I think I took it in the positive way, that because I was training in a martial art and I really loved all the, you know, old school kung fu movies and stuff like that, Jackie Chan, and seeing like the hard training montages and things, I was always trying to push myself harder in the in the jiu-jitsu and harder in the parkour than, you know, I would normally do. Like one kind of bad story, not bad, but
anecdote,
exactly. That's directly correlates to that is we had a tree that was possible to do laches all the way around the tree.
Oh, okay.
And so one of our training things, just to like build toughness or whatever, is we would do laches around the tree until we would get like at least 3 rips on each hand. And exactly. And then after we got the rips, we would go to the monkey bars, and then we would do like the quick laches, like the across it for at least a couple times until like, you know, until we just couldn't anymore.
Wow.
And so it was a mix of things. I'm not going to say it was just like this hardcore, I want to like be a Shaolin monk type deal. I know now that I was also using like parkour in like a bit of a masochistic way as like a coping mechanism for, you know, just like the internalized like pain or turmoil that I had from like my childhood stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Is there anything that you would be willing to share on that? Like in terms of like, what was it like a family? So you mentioned drugs.
Yeah.
There's drug use like nearby. Is that like in your immediate family, or I don't want to like pry?
No, it's cool. I don't really mind at all.
I think that it's definitely super relevant. It's another thing that's come up on, you know, this podcast several times, because I think you're not alone. There's like, I would agree that it's been a way for me to channel certain energies that I didn't know what to do with. And some of it ended up being a sort of violence against my body in a way. Yeah. And then, you know, we work through that phase, hopefully, if you can. But yeah, I think that's especially, again, when it's earlier on. I think the more mainstream it gets, the less it becomes part of like the archetype of that practitioner. Yeah. But anyhow, I would love to, just whatever you're willing to expand on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's definitely an aspect of like, still I feel like from the trauma I don't have like the greatest memory of everything, but I do remember like my mom, I think she left her house when she was like 16 or 17, so she was kind of like on the road living her life, and she was into drugs and stuff like that. For example, like whenever I was like, she's I think tried a lot of them. Maybe not like gone as deep as like heroin or anything like that, but pretty much anything else that's not, you know, like you're stabbing yourself with a needle, she's probably tried, at least. And when you're in that kind of community, thankfully she wasn't on anything when she had me or whatever, but she was still around like those kinds of people, you know what I mean? And her nature is like always been to like be too trusting and like too nice, so she would have these kinds of people around her and then invariably kind of get like taken advantage of, you know what I mean? Whether it be like monetarily, or just get into an abusive relationship, like physically and, you know, verbally abusive. So like some of my earliest memories, like one of my earliest memories honestly is being in like a daycare center, I was staying with people that I don't even remember or know anything about because my mom was in jail for like a couple months or up to a year. I can't remember exactly, but and it was like the daycare's what's it called? Like nap time. I didn't want to nap or whatever, and then I think I was just laying down and I happened to look over and I saw like my mom, through the window. I hadn't seen her in however how long. I didn't know, as a kid I didn't know, I didn't understand that she was in jail, and I just know she was gone, you know what I mean? And so like there's moments like that. There's moments where, because she was like, even when she wasn't doing drugs, which I don't think she ever did drugs after she had me, but she was always around these types of people where, the kids were trying to like smoke cigarettes, and I'm like 5 or 6 years old at the time. They're trying to like break into my mom's car and get cigarettes, and I'm like, no, I'm gonna like go tell my mom. And since there's like 3 of them, they'll like grab me and like throw me in a ditch and then just like do what they want, like stuff like this. So yeah, it's like, I mean, so there's like moments like this, and there was a couple times where, because we would kind of be reliant on the kindness of others and find out like they're really not that kind. I had times where we were staying in a mobile home. We didn't have like water or electricity. We left, and I guess I found out later that we were like behind on rent, and we come back, all our stuff is in a pile, or maybe 2 piles or something like that, and the landlord, ends up like setting fire to like some of our stuff, you know what I mean, and kicking us out. So there's like moments like these interspersed with just like not knowing what the hell's going on as a kid, and there's like little bits of like sexual abuse, thankfully nothing crazy, but I had immediately after that one, we went with like, I don't know how my mom knew them, but they were like a super religious family. But the older, their daughter, who was like maybe 9 when I was like 5 or 6, just was like a freak, man. And she was like always trying to like, she would throw her panties at me and try to sit on my face when I'm trying to like nap. So there's like things like this, which as a kid and not having any kind of litmus test, like you knew it wasn't right, you know what I mean? But it wasn't ever something like I also didn't have a dad. Obviously I'm talking about my mom a lot. My dad wasn't around. There was never like a moment where I felt like, oh man, my life is fucked up, or this is, because it was just like life. I was just living it, I always describe it, because like people ask me about the dad thing sometimes as like, oh, did you ever like wish you had a dad or like missed your dad or anything?
Like,
but like,
I didn't know dad, the
yeah,
concept.
exactly. I never saw like a positive male figure probably until I started Japanese jiu-jitsu. Until then, like guys that I knew were like, men were the people that would like hit you or slap you or like, just make you do stuff, and they weren't really to be trusted, you know what I mean? So
yeah, wow.
So it was like, I didn't really feel like I was missing anything, but I know obviously like going through that trauma, even though I perceived it as normal at time, I was totally like internalizing things that for me ended up mostly manifesting as like super low like self-worth, you know what I mean? So all these bad things were happening to me, so I felt like, okay, so it's just normal for like someone to treat me like shit, like that's just like all right, you know what I mean? Obviously it's not,
yeah, but yeah, oh man,
but in the moment you just expect it. So like the first time I saw what I would consider like a positive family unit, you know what I mean, like a loving father and mother and all that kind of stuff, everybody getting along, was like when I was like 16 or 17. Yeah, so it was like through time, and then thankfully, like as you were kind of saying, like yeah, parkour totally was like this kind of coping mechanism, almost like a self-flagellation kind of like masochistic discipline for me, because I still had this low self-worth, and I felt like for me maybe I was worthless, but I could still create something of worth, if that made sense.
Yeah.
And so that I had that mindset in like the early years, which, like I said, helped me train super, super hard. Thankfully, I was lucky and didn't get like injured like in a bad way that I couldn't keep pushing. But I also think because of this like martial art mindset of progress, I was finally able to understand like and take parkour not just as like the physical sport of it, but that discipline of overcoming the obstacles, and then slowly realizing like, okay, I have like some mental and emotional issues that I need to sort out as well. So I think it was, I mean, I know it's like the super most cheesy thing to say, but like martial arts and parkour definitely, I think, were instrumental in like probably saving me as like a human being, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a bit
Wow.
heavy, right?
No, man, that's an incredible and like harrowing story for sure, man. Thank you for sharing. Like, it's I mean, everyone's journey is different, right? But that is like such a theme, and I think it's going to be really powerful. That, you know, I think again, just because I think it's hard to know that it's good to be reminded that you're not alone sometimes in feeling those feelings and working through that. And I've seen it time and time again. I think it's not, you know, something that ever necessarily completely goes away depending on like, you know, your own life story. But yeah, it's very, I mean, that's awesome. I would love to hear like even more like when did you realize that some of this stuff was like unhealthy? And like, because I think that's something that true. It's like so hard. And like, you have this void that you're talking about, you know, this low self-worth, you feel special, you feel good again, or you feel like you might be worth something when you start to achieve things and you see, you know, incremental progress. You're like, all right, at least I can create that. I like actually the way you put that. It's an interesting way. It's just like, I can create something of value even if I'm of not value.
Yeah,
you know, that's
exactly.
definitely a mindset that can really push you. And then we see some of like the most, you know, explosive, like powerful, like even like prolific, influential figures in anything, but especially in sports and stuff like that. Especially in martial arts, I would say even. But some of these guys are working through that that sort of existential crisis, or not even existential, but just like whatever, like that self relationship that we all have to figure out and master in some way. And that's actually going to be a big theme in our next episode, just to plug, I don't know why I'm doing this, but plug the Parkour History series. It actually might air before this one, but if you haven't checked it out, the Raymond Bell is a very interesting case of grappling with that issue. And I think, anyways, but can you tell me more about how your individual journey was, and like when you started, how did you shift it? Like, what did your practice, how did it evolve through that problem and that solution?
Yeah, I mean, so like in the beginning, obviously I'm not even like aware of it, right? You're just like doing kind of what feels right, and pushing yourself and trying to train super hard, but you don't really have a concept. At least I didn't have a concept of overtraining or anything like that. I didn't think, you know, like I had at that time zero, you know, sports science like knowledge or research under my belt, and so it was pretty much just like, okay, like the harder you train, the better you're gonna get. So just like push as hard as you can, all day, every day. And thankfully, as like a young kid, you know, going through puberty and all these kinds of things, you're pretty resilient for that kind of stuff. So there's not really like a better time to do that. You know, I never had any issues with like Osgood Slaughters like some people get, you know, with the growth plates. I'm short as hell. Was always short as hell. So I was already ready to go, impact wise, thankfully. But yeah, I think it was just as parkour started to become more for me than just just like a thing to do, you know, as I started trying to like integrate it in my life, as I saw that there were these other opportunities. You know, I was like one of the first, I think, sponsored athletes in the US through American Parkour and the Tribe, because at the time when I got signed up with them, they were sponsored by K-Swiss, because Sebastian Foucan was doing like the Ariake thing with them, you know, trying to sell a $130 shoe to the poorest sports.
I got a pair somehow.
No, and they gave out so many free pairs.
Yeah, they gave out some free ones.
But you know, like as I started to see this, I think also as like a viable career path, and then just through like the natural, I think, curiosity that I had is seeing kind of pushing towards the edge of like what's more, realizing like, okay, I can physically and technically push the limits, but and mentally through like a fear side, right? There's that obviously in parkour. But I think one of the things that interested me most is kind of like what I call like that horizontal progression, right? So I can
Mm.
you can always take a jump bigger, or you can do like a more difficult skill,
Yeah.
or you can add, more and more height or risk or consequence. And that's one way in my mind that you can kind of push, push your jumps, push your vaults, push your flips in a vertical fashion. But
Mm-hmm.
then the other aspect of it is like, how many different ways can you do that jump?
Mm.
How many different ways can you do that vault, that flip, that swing, whatever? And so I think through this, I don't really know how I got interested
Mm.
in it that way. Maybe it's because like as a smaller dude, I was not ever like the biggest
You're not
jumper.
gonna have like the biggest broad jump.
Exactly.
It's gonna be some 6'12" guy.
Yeah, exactly. 6'12" guy, exactly. Yeah, so like, yeah, I could jump, all right for my size, but there's always going to be someone with bigger jumps. And so, but the way that I found that, like, instead of being discouraged by that, it was fine to support the people that, like, yeah, man, like Mitch Todorovic, you're going to like fly, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I'll be over here doing this weird, like, spinny stuff. But so I think through that interest, it started coming into that concept of like, okay, well, mentally, yeah, there's like the fear side. There is this creativity side of seeing how else you can apply the skills, but what other like mental ways can you challenge yourself, And I think first of all, like as is natural, I think for any young person getting into a thing, they kind of like wrap their whole identity in with that, right? So like that's where the worth
the big
comes
mistake
in. Yeah,
that
exactly.
I made.
No, everybody makes it.
No, everyone makes it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And
no,
so it's like,
but
okay,
it's total. It's a classic.
yeah. So like my worth now, because as me as a human being, still not having worth, I can wrap my worth up into what my parkour level is, which is great when you're doing good. But then when you're injured or when you, have a bad day, then it's like, everything tanks. So, through seeing this and then realizing later on through like some romantic relationships and stuff like that, these other things that I had wrapped up into my identity, like being like a man of my word, like if I made a promise, I would keep that promise no matter what, for example, which I think like general guidelines with life are cool. But when you create these like hard and solid black and white rules, this is when you can kind of get into some like sticky business, because as much as humans would love to, delineate anything into good and bad and black and white, like the world is just 100% not that, depending on our perspective, everything's different. So I think like when my first start towards like unwrapping myself from being, my worth only being tied to my parkour ability was when I was like, what was it? Must have been like 2009 or 2010. And like the Cliff Notes version of it was essentially like I committed to a lady and the relationship was fine, but I took what was like a strong connection with the female, and because a man and hormones and all that stuff, immediately said,
wait, how old are you?
33 now, yeah.
No, how old
was
you?
I?
So
yeah,
you were
like 18 or 19 or
There's
something like that.
baby.
Exactly. And, you
hormones.
have a connection with someone and you immediately think, okay, well, she's of the someone I'm attracted to, and I have a connection, so that must mean like we're going to like be romantic, you know what I mean? Or be intimate or whatever. And so even from the beginning there were red flags, but it was one of those things where as a man of my word, I said we were, committed, and it ended up being one of those relationships that I think in the long term we learned a lot, and I think there's stuff that I can say was positive for sure, and we definitely like loved each other in our own way, but it was just not healthy for either of us, and it got to the point where through, arguing constantly, and the similar situation, like she was probably my first like committed relationship, you're just like, well, maybe this is just how relationships are supposed to be, you don't have any other litmus test to base it off of, especially if you didn't have like a mother and father with like a good relationship or anything like that. And so I ended up, through time, I think we were together like almost 4 years, and she had some health problems and stuff like that. But the main gist of it was that I felt just empty all the time. Like I was putting energy out, but neither of us, the way that we loved was received by the other, if that makes sense. You know,
Mhm.
I'm not like fully ascribed into like this love
The
language
love
type
languages,
thing.
yeah, but that's
But
a,
it's like
it's
that
a
concept.
language to talk about
Yeah,
love.
exactly. And
It's
so
a certain language.
we
It's a
didn't vibe in
vocabulary.
that way. Exactly. And I was like suicidal. At the time I was having, I had a job as a pastry chef, and I was like doing my parkour stuff on the side. And because my pastry chef job was like pretty good, and I had like a life insurance policy and tied in with it,
Mm-hmm.
and I would take my motorcycle to work every day. You know, there was these moments where I'm crossing like bridges and be like, well, I feel like nothing I can do is good enough for her.
Mm.
And she didn't want to go back to her family, but so the least I could do is like have an accident, and then at least
yeah.
she would have some money. I would not be in pain anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then obviously eventually I was like, yeah, this is not a normal way to think. Like, what the fuck are you thinking?
I mean, thank God you recognize that.
Yeah,
but yeah,
exactly.
it's like it's a totally understandable state of mind to get in, and you know, almost everyone in their lifetime gets, not everyone, but a lot of people
Yeah.
in today's world, because there's so much sickness and disease in like
Yeah.
whatever, and I
No,
don't
it's
open
tough.
that can of worms. But basically, it's not uncommon that people get to
Mhm.
that suicidal position,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, yeah, every culture has its own like brand of it.
or just like, yeah, it's like I mean, yeah, especially on the bike, you're like, well, I'm going fast.
yeah,
Could happen
exactly.
like in the next moment. It wouldn't be. It's just you entertain that stuff, and then you're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I probably shouldn't be thinking like that.
Yeah, it's like I think I've seen like on Twitter or whatever. It's like, oh, do you have any depressive thoughts? He's like, yeah, well, doesn't everybody? He's like, no.
Some people don't.
So, yeah, thankfully, exactly. I realized like this is not a normal way to feel, and then through therapy, like we did couples therapy at first, and I'm realizing like I'm lying to this therapist,
Mm.
and then I'm asking myself afterwards like, why? You know,
Mm.
what's the whole purpose of me lying to this therapist? And then realizing actually I'm just lying to myself to like take, we had of course like I said, nothing is fully black fully white or whatever, so we had good moments in these relationships, and I would hold on to those good moments like, you know, like they were the relationship,
Mhm.
and put a blind eye to all the negative sides. And so once I like realized that I was doing that, and then through, like I said, the therapy, and then just like this, I don't know, self-awareness or this interest in meta thought, you know, thinking
Mhm.
about my thoughts or whatever, I realized or had traced it back to the fact that like, oh, okay, because I wrapped into my identity this idea that I will always stick to my word, you know, I'm actually lying to myself. I'm lying to this like therapist.
Mm.
And it's
Yeah,
all
you
because
centered around this one thing,
yeah,
and then it actually paradoxically makes you the opposite of this.
exactly.
Like, you know, whatever you decide you're gonna be, I'm gonna put myself in this box.
Mhm.
You'll fucking find yourself anywhere but inside the box.
100%.
It's so crazy.
So I realized that, and then was like, okay, it's because I committed to her. You know, we weren't married or anything, but I
Mm.
had verbally committed to her. And then I asked myself then, okay, so what if I just say it's over then? And then I realized like just through the thought process of times like, okay, like, yeah, maybe it'll be harder for her in the beginning, but like every moment that we're together, we're more likely to be fighting than enjoying each other's time. So it's like just pure logic. It's
Mm.
probably going to be better for both of us in the long term if we end it. You know what I mean? And as soon as I, like, as you said, like I put myself in this box, I thought of it as like I put myself in the prison, right? It's like there's like the two types of prisons, the one where you can see the bars and the ones where you can't see the bars. Like I had no idea through my own identity of being a person of my word had put myself in this prison where I ended up, you know, being suicidal and in like in a overall negative relationship for, you know, 3 or 4 years. And so it was funny though, once I realized that it was like a switch, like I felt like everything went better. It was almost like a movie. Like I could hear like the birds chirping. I felt like my driving skills were better. My like parkour skills were better. Everything, you know, and obviously it was a hard conversation and to like break up with this person or whatever. But
you get back that energy, that piece of you that you sectioned off, and it's like a splinter of kryptonite in Superman. Even if Splinter is gonna fucking take away all the powers, even if he might be a man, just regular man, but he's not gonna be Superman unless he takes that little shard out.
Yeah, so I think it was like this, I don't know if it's happenstance or whatever it is, but this like serendipitous event kind of helped me understand like, okay, I also thought of myself as a parkour person, someone that like knows myself and knows what I'm capable of, but I realized I had this huge blind spot. You know what I mean? And so I think that humbled me a lot in like the mental side of things. Thankfully, it didn't take me into like a place of like overthinking of self-doubt, but it made me realize like, okay, there's a whole lot more to explore internally than I originally understood, you know, as like an 18 or 19-year-old kid or whatever. And so from that, it was just kind of like, you know, periodic moments where then I still hadn't addressed any of like my childhood trauma, for example, at this point or whatever. But it's like, I think that's the moment that kind of started me on that path. And then I think the thing that
what was the moment, the serendipitous moment?
It was just, real. I mean,
it was just this realization.
Yeah, it was like realizing that I was lying to the therapist, even though he was trying to help me.
It was everything that you just talked about. I thought for a second that there was like another thing.
No, sorry. No, it was just
I found
exactly
a quarter
that.
on the ground. And it was me.
It was like the Zoolander thing.
Yeah,
looking at myself in a spoon.
yeah. I don't know, but no, sorry. Please continue though.
No, you're good. Yeah, so just, you know, considering myself as an honest person, but realizing to hold on to this bit of truth, I ended up lying to myself and all these other people. Was like that moment when I realized that I just wasn't doing what was in my own best interest, right? And that's when I started to shift more from like a black and white type of perspective, slowly, obviously through time, and realizing that there's like a whole lot more to progress than just like training harder or doing this or sticking to your word or that kind of stuff. You know, there's a lot of analysis and awareness and this kind of like internal development that can also have just as much benefit as like, you know, if you have a wall, you can like punch at the wall until you break through it, or you can climb over it, or you can go around it, or maybe you realize
dissolve it.
Yeah,
whatever. There's a million things, right?
Yeah, 100%. So
maybe you realize you don't need to be on the other side of that wall.
Yeah, it could be for sure.
There's so many. I mean, sorry, I'm getting
meta
on it, but basically, I love where you're going with it. This is like a pillow I made for the. It's called the Dimension line for the podcast, because I just like this is some of the journey that I feel like everyone ultimately maybe goes on. I don't know, not everyone's got shades,
but we hope, right?
But there's like a sort of like a self-realization or self-actualization process that has parallels across like, you know, multiple humans and most people. And this resonates so hard with me. I love what you're saying, man. It's like and it's so cool that you actually were I think that, you know, for me, this happened years after I was 18, but you know, it was really cool that you found yourself able to work through some of these things that early in life. I think a lot of people, it's actually not that early where it actually happens. Some people die and they never even get to this like trauma that they've been holding on to, or the next step, or, you know, whatever prisons they put inside or themselves inside. There's so much there. Oh man, I think it's like so powerful. I didn't know we were going to go here, but I think it's so cool because I don't know that, like, this is a question that I've also been pondering for some time is, does parkour actually, you know, there's a certain natural, everyone's just alive, right? And just part of being alive is dealing with these questions and dealing with these, trying to heal yourself and do, I mean, this is sort of the story of our generation in a way. I think like these questions are coming up in a way that they haven't before. At least, you know, not like this, whatever. They're the same questions. They're ancient, but also they're new in how they're coming up. But I think parkour can actually accelerate the process, like, and it did for you and it did for me. So I think that's why parkour is so cool and so powerful, because like you said, there's vertical development and there's, you know, horizontal development, or, you know, whatever dimensions you want to put on it. But and then you realize that parkour, the way you're like thinking about parkour, is just a vertical thing amongst a whole other terrain of things, you know, and dimensions. That's why I call it dimension. I'm like, there's just infinite dimensions
it makes
to like
100%
to look
sense,
at. And so I just like love everything about what you just said, because it also just helps me feel better about, you know, some of the things I haven't talked about, you know, with someone like you. And so it's cool to hear it reflected back in some ways.
No, for sure.
So then how was your practice? I don't even know where, I don't even know where to go, but like, how did your practice change? Like we talked about, you were the, you know, now we kind of talked about it, but also like, where are you at now with that journey? Or also, do you want to fill in before we go there? Okay, you were now one of the first or the first, I don't know, like
Yeah,
first
so
team of the tribe that was American Parkour. And let's like maybe get us up to speed before we go back into
so
that.
back to parkour
Back to the history.
Yeah, so I think I'm a first generation American practitioner for parkour. I was definitely amongst the first to start in Texas. As far as I know, it was pretty much me and the Tap Brothers starting around the same time. And I think pretty much from 2003 up until maybe 2007, I didn't really have, nobody really maybe knew much about me up until that. And then I think the American Parkour Boards came out in like 2005 or 2006 or something like that. I can't remember when Mark, M2 ended up starting those, but being involved in those and then, starting to find other similar, practitioners and people. Cause like that's, especially when I didn't really have many other people to train with. Like I had some friends and slowly was able to get them into training and they were super into it, for a number of years. But eventually, life happens and they started getting into other things. So predominantly I feel like my first, I don't know, 6 or 7 years of training was solo, but as I start to realize and see that there's this other national community and get old enough to actually be able to like travel or do something about it, that's when I think I did my first national jam was like a PKNY, maybe in like 2007 or 2006. And that's when I met like Travis Graves, who's another like old guy from Michigan, beast in the community, mostly doing stuff with APK. And I'm sure I met other people, but it was because we were in the same hostel. We had this nice moment where like there was supposed to be an opening ceremony at the Soldiers and something. I can't remember the spot, but it's one of the spots near the Upper West Side that has like a bunch of cool stuff. But that ended up getting canceled. But we were like, man, we came from Michigan, we came from Texas, like we're here to train. So we like ran through Harlem at like 3 a.m, getting like catcalled and yelled at by like the locals. And then we show up to this like pretty dope spot, and then we just like send it, you know what I mean? And then this was before obviously like this kind of like self-realization stuff, but it was like a huge hit to my ego in a positive way when I realized like, okay, all this stuff that I've been doing like on my own mostly in Texas had been paying off because I was like one of the best at the jam, you know what I mean? Like I was able to do things, most of the things that people were doing, and at least had this, now I had an external like, what's the word? Yeah, like an external validation, you know what I mean? Not necessarily the best thing, but that's what happened, right? And then that kind of continued. Ended up meeting the next year. I met Jesse Danger and hit it off with him. I think I met Tyson as well that year, and these were kind of like the first like big influences as far as other like first generation people in the US.
And for those who don't know, Tyson Cheka, who's like one of the founding members of Parkour Visions in Seattle, and you mentioned Jesse Danger, who's like now still running the Movement Creative. They just had an awesome event, but in New York, anyhow. Yeah,
exactly. So, beasts of their time. I mean, Jesse's still training, Tyson's still doing stuff. Like he was one of the first people to be pushing, like the standards of building practices that Apex and every other gym that wants to be something like holds themselves to. Yeah. So
Sturdy Made, #, Sturdy Made.
There you go.
Shout out Sturdy Made.
Exactly. So those were like the first people that I kind of vibed with, and then started, what's it called? And then I started traveling more. So I went to plenty of national jams, eventually started our own kind of national jam in Texas, but somehow, that's how it was. During the K-Swiss tour, I ended up getting the attention of Mark Turok and the Tribe, because they did something in Dallas, and we went there, and, I represented well. At the time, and that's I think how I started getting into the Tribe. So that's how I ended up meeting Ryan Ford and Billy. He's not in the scene much anymore. He does like video stuff, but all the first gen people, Frosty, he's another big old one. So the Tribe like had at least a couple maybe iterations before me, but I think when they started trying to be more of just like a East Coast New England type team, and they got Tyson and they got Ryan and then they got me. That's kind of when I think that was like near the height, I guess, of my popularity as a parkour athlete, because like the forums were still, a big thing.
Yeah.
And then being on the tribe meant something in that moment.
God, man, yeah, it's crazy like how the baton, I should say, gets passed like in so many different directions, and it's like, yeah, like what the tribe is like, you could think, I mean, like, is what, I mean, we don't actually have necessarily the same thing going on right now, but you could think of it as like Tempest is kind of carrying that baton, I could say, more than anyone right now, in terms of like setting, the American standard for whatever, producing like the kind of content that means something to parkour athletes. But yeah, it's that's another topic, but it's always been fascinating how, ever since, I mean, the tribe had a few different iterations. Merm had that kind of torch, I think, for a little while, like kind of carrying a little bit of that American flame on this side of the pond. Always there's like a little bit of, our own flavor over here than what happens in Europe and England, and everything has its own thing. But it's interesting to me that America always like has so much, it feels still has so much potential, and yet there's just like, there's certain logistics that make it difficult for something to really blossom in the way that we've seen with Store or with some of the things that are happening in England, especially England, but other places too. Germany's got, everywhere's got some good places, and America does have good places too,
Yeah,
and Mark Turok, the World Chase Tag thing is big right now, but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, first, America's like big as hell. People don't really understand that, like, for example, if I were to drive to Colorado to go train with you from like my hometown San Antonio, it's like what, 20 something hours, right?
It's a flight instead of a
drive,
drive,
it's
as
a
far
flight.
as I'm concerned.
And it's not a cheap flight like they have in Europe, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a piece of it. I feel like Americans in general are pretty headstrong. I don't necessarily know why.
Yeah, there's something about it. Right? There's a culture out here.
So I feel like there's been nice moments where there's like this opportunity for a bunch of, leaders in the community or something like this to come together. But because everybody ends up wanting to lead, it devolves and ends up, petering out or doesn't work. So I don't know. Exactly. That's like a whole different kind of conversation, I guess. But yeah. So essentially, Tribe was on that up until 2012. Knox was on the Tribe.
That's how I met you. Was through Knox. You came out to Colorado at one point, or maybe I was in DC. Even I don't even know.
I feel like the very first time we met was at a Ninja Warrior thing when they were doing it in Dallas or something like that.
Oh yeah. That's it. The Dallas one. Actually, I flew a one prop plane down to there, and that was like, that was so fun. I don't remember how that day. I mean, I remember I did pretty well, but I remember.
I just remember the other friend that you had was doing like random building stuff and like
what's his name?
Off times and.
Oh my God, Lance.
Okay.
Lance. I don't remember his last name right now, but if I ever get the chance, I'll put Lance on the podcast because Lance is an absolute insane.
Yeah, so I remember that's the first time meeting you. I think it was my 21st birthday actually. And yeah, so I was on the Tribe at first. It did mean something for a little while. And like as an 18-year-old kid being sponsored, like I think we were making I think each athlete got something like $10,000 a year to do parkour. We got free shoes. We were also getting
that's good money today still.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, to do parkour at least.
Yeah, 100%. Like I don't know what monetary sponsorships are going on now. I think X Dubai probably has something. But it was definitely for the time good, and I think for now I would still be stoked to get that kind of sponsorship.
For sure.
And yeah, we were doing performance jobs and all that kind of stuff, and things were cool. Like I said, up until 2012, the recession was a little bit of a big hit, and I know the sponsorship dropped, and then we had to also, I know I was doing odd jobs and stuff like that, but it wasn't that tough. But I think the thing that then switched for me was realizing that the Tribe was supposed to be a team, but it really wasn't. It was really Mark's thing. And and I think Mark is a great guy. I think when I left, I already like apologized to him via email after, but I left in kind of like an abrupt way because of, learning that it was actually Mark's thing, and if you weren't down with that, then like too bad, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that ended it for me was Vinny, who's another beast, Vinny Coriel, Grand Junction, right? And he has some autoimmune thing. I can't remember what it is called.
Cystic fibrosis.
Thank you. Cystic fibrosis. And like his life expectancy was super low. He was on the tribe. He wanted to do the art of motion, which was like the only big comp at the time, I think. I don't think NAPC was a thing yet or anything else really. And because APK didn't want to support Red Bull stuff because of energy drinks being bad, which I understand. I don't drink it. You know what I mean? It's not my thing.
Yeah.
But they were, putting money into parkour, and this dude who's amazing at parkour, of course I would want to support this opportunity for him, right?
Yeah.
To have this experience, especially if his life expectancy is supposed to be like 10 years from that point. He's not going to be around anymore,
Yeah.
And so it ended up being that moment where the majority of us on the tribe were like, yeah, Vinny should be able to do it, and we should be able to do it. But Mark wasn't down for that, so I immediately left the tribe actually. Then, so that was like 2012.
It's a walkout.
Yeah, exactly. And I think shortly after, like I know Dylan left.
Yeah, I remember that.
Dylan Baker went to Merm, I guess.
We snatched him up.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I mean, yeah, that was. I mean, that's a whole other. Again, that story hopefully will be told one day too.
Yeah.
With Dylan, but.
Oh my God.
But yeah, no, it was crazy. Yeah, that was when the tribe sort of dissolved. 2012-ish.
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yeah, so things started changing from there.
Everything was changing around that time.
And that was like the end of my notoriety and like the national scene. I obviously had good connections from like traveling and stuff like that, but that's when I like really just put my head down and started working on like a teaching business in San Antonio. And so I started with APK teaching as well, like in 2009. Obviously I left in 2012 because I didn't want to have anything to do with him at the time, with APK or the tribe or anything. And so I started Parkour San Antonio then. I think because I was teaching since 2009, I went from like, also since I was like a college dropout because I was already making enough money with parkour to not care about stuff. I also didn't have any business experience, so didn't know anything at all in the beginning of about business. I was super interested in teaching and training though. My first like professional student was like a 57-year-old woman, and she had previously broken her spine, was missing an ACL, and like for whatever reason she wanted to train parkour. And I was like, dope, okay, let's go. But I don't want to hurt you, So I started having me dive deep into just researching, anatomy and sports science, physiology. Kinesiology was actually the thing that I started doing in college before I dropped out. Before that, I thought I wanted to be a chef, and that was going to be my career path. Exactly. But obviously with the parkour stuff kicking off, I was like, okay, maybe I should find something in that realm. And so, I mean, the lovely thing about the internet is you can, if you really do want to learn it, like the information's out there, right? So obviously the parkour, and still now the parkour research is still quite young and new, but I mean, there's hundreds of years of sports science research, right? And so just through my own trial and error and experimentation, started getting better at teaching and realizing like this is a whole separate skill set in addition to, like obviously there's athletes and then there's like coaches, and you don't have to, not every athlete's going to be a good coach, not every coach is going to be a good athlete kind of thing. But it just happened to be something that I also enjoyed too. I think from having my martial arts teacher again be like one of the first positive male influences in my life, and realizing like, okay, like this is how another human can help someone. You can give them something as simple as a cool technique or a move, but you can also like give them these lessons be a more critical thinker, to be more aware, so I think that's really helped me understand that the concept side of stuff was just as important, if not more so, for having longevity in a sport and in life, honestly, right? So because it helps you navigate the different obstacles that you might deal with. And sadly, most of the obstacles we deal with in our lives are not walls and
oh, if they were only walls and rails,
exactly.
we'd be kings.
Exactly.
We'd be living like freaking sultans, man. No, yeah, that's hilarious.
So ended up getting a decent enough business. Like, I had a couple part-timers. I was able to like live and not have to worry. I worked with Jesse most summers because San Antonio's too hot. Mm-hmm. I ran the Winter Jam and started it back in San Antonio, since it was the first jam to happen in the winter, because everybody else was summer jams, but nobody wants to train in 115 degree weather, which is fine. And I know we were one of the first jams to start to get permits for what we were doing. So we had permits for all the spots. We had insurance, sponsored usually by like Woof Puff or whatever. That was the other thing too. Like I there was a lot of this like clickiness. Like, okay, are you with ABK? Are you with Woof Puff? Are you,
It's like Game of Thrones parkour life or whatever. Exactly. Everyone's vying for that.
So I thankfully didn't really care, and I had good enough contacts, with Victor, and eventually was back on good terms with Mark too, and with the Tempest guys as well, at least. And so it was easy enough to get gear, get sponsored with gear. Some of them, like I said, I think Wolf Puff was usually sponsoring our insurance, which was awesome. Thankfully, San Antonio is like cheap as hell, and most of the permits were free as long as you had insurance. So I think there was a couple times where we had like a couple $100s to rent out a pavilion. But it was definitely an event that I was like super, super proud of, just because I knew some people were still doing like the jams guerrilla style, which is nothing wrong with that. Yeah. But it's a bit of a shame when you have like, 100 people and then like you get kicked out.
And then it's like trying to round up. Oh my God. I've been to so many like just like weird walkthroughs of campus with like police like 40 feet behind us, like exactly. Keep it moving.
Yeah, and it was just the way jams were for like a long time.
That is incredible. I didn't realize that. I'm sad I never made it down to Winter Jam because I always saw footage of it and I was like, God damn, that looks fun.
Yeah, Max told me, and it makes sense too, like again, not being in like a traditional family, it was never a thought like, okay, like there's Thanksgiving and then there's like Christmas and then there's New Year. So this is like all these people that are already taking holiday, and then you're not, maybe ours was always the first weekend after New Year's. Oh, yeah. So it wasn't like, I think in hindsight, I realized, well, not in hindsight, last time I saw Max last week.
Like, oh.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. It was not necessarily the most accessible time for people to jam, but still, I think at the height that I was running it, we had on our busiest day, over 200 people.
Wow.
At it, which was pretty dope.
That's huge for a jam, especially.
And it was usually a 4-day event, and I think our lowest day on that biggest weekend was still like over 100. So I'm not sure how many people jammed the whole day, but it was definitely something that I was proud of and happy to be able to do, and thankful to the city of San Antonio for being cheap for it, for what it was, and for the sponsors that were able to help make it possible, as well as the people on the ground, obviously the other San Antonio community members that helped make it happen. And so I did that, and I was San Antonio holding things down with Parkour SA, Winter Jam, stuff like that, up until 2016, and that's when I went to Dubai for ParkourDXB. And that was a bit of an interesting one. It was definitely an opportunity where I thought I would just like learn some stuff and come back to use it, but it ended up being another one of those like formative kind of like switches where I'm realizing like, oh, okay, there's actually a lot more that I'm still not aware of that, I can still be learning. And so, I mean, I think that moment that we talked about in the past with that relationship that I had broken off, it was like understanding that I was missing something, but it would end up being just kind of like the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, you pull on that thread, you're like, oh, there's levels to this game.
Exactly. So Dubai was like another big one of those.
What was that around? Like, can you define, like, is it easy to even encapsulate that, or is it possible to,
Yeah, I think, I
like,
mean,
what was the lesson there that you needed to learn?
so the first thing, I guess, was, I mean, it was one of those cliche, like, don't meet your hero kind of things.
Oh,
But I
yeah.
don't want to say it was that bad because I've heard like horror stories with that. And I think
Yeah.
Steph is a cool dude. I love training with him. We had always had good talks. But I think there's always a certain weight of expectation when you only see somebody in a certain capacity, right? It's
Yeah.
hard. I had like passed into unknowingly that little bit of a place of like idolatry, you know what I mean?
Mm.
So I'm sure you're well aware of like all the like David Bell like worshippers and stuff like that.
Oh,
And he
yeah.
actually seemed to, I had never met him, so I can't say, but
Uh.
he seemed to be not that cool of a dude actually, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's like, yeah,
and so
definitely up for debate.
yeah, and so
What you
Steph
like.
was a great guy, but he was also just a human at the end of the day. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
That's what that's I mean, we're all human, right? And
Exactly.
It's
And
really hard.
so I came with these expectations that were not realistic actually for him to meet, right?
Mm.
And he was already going into a tough time. And so that like from the beginning changed my understanding of what this gig, which ended up being job and like bit of a career path in Dubai, switched the focus of what it was,
Mm.
because they had come from working in Thailand, and I think things can go a little bit more loose and fast there. And Dubai definitely was trying to hold itself to like that American or that like European standard of how like a company should be run, with simple things like waivers and insurance and all that kind
Building
of stuff.
codes and
Yeah.
fire codes and all that crap.
Exactly. And so I never got anything as big as like what Apex got or, Parkour Visions got, but I had, a nice thing going on, and I knew enough that I was like, okay, so I had originally come to ParkourDXB to learn from Steph, to also learn how they ran their business so that I could then take that and infuse it back into Parkour SA. But then I had realized, like, actually, they need my help to help them, get all their things settled for how to run ParkourDXB. And then Steph was not in, like, the emotional state, really, to be the mentor that I had wished that I had had in that moment, you know? So it was kind of one of those things where I got there and I just kind of, like, had to put my nose to the grindstone and get, like, working to help them keep this thing rolling, So I ended up finding my niche with them in more of like the curriculum development, the teacher training, as we started getting more people, obviously, and maintaining what I would call like the integrity of like the product, making sure that our teaching standards were still held high, and finding that sweet spot balance through Chris, which is the partner of Stefan Vigru. Chris got to be able to handle like the business side of things and deal with the investors, and then it was Steph and then me towards the end there, making sure that we were still not having a bad student coach ratio, making sure that the curriculums we were doing were actually like relevant to what we wanted to, and we weren't just like, as can happen, I'm sure you've seen, like a lot of times maybe it just turns into babysitting, really,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. I was like, a lot of people just they don't even care.
Yeah.
Like, they're like, yeah, daycare works for me. Please just take my son and daughter off my hands. They're going in crazy.
Exactly.
Do something with them for an hour and a half.
100%.
But also, they also sort of know that it's like, do something good though.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Like, be that role model, please. And you're like, all right. I mean, I get paid $12 an hour, but I'll be a role model for your kid. I'll teach your kid the things that his father's not teaching him. If you really want me to do it,
yeah,
I'll try.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. We'll try. But I mean, but that's it, right? Like, yeah, at the bare minimum, we could have totally been just a daycare, glorified daycare, and make it happen. But since teaching was something that I ended up also being passionate about, it was a good opportunity to kind of like push and test that. And it was a completely different environment than America. You know what I mean? We were, my first like Indian students and Pakistani students and Arabic students and European students were, from there.
Oh, wow.
And so really getting to see what sticks and what doesn't stick depending on, language barriers and cultural differences and all that kind of stuff was a super cool experience. And to be in as high paced a work environment as Dubai was awesome. You know what I mean? And it was definitely, it's super super hard. Like the behind the scenes stuff was, I was on the cusp of getting a loan and trying to invest in a gym actually for San Antonio, so that we could have our own like legit facility. And I was going to have two of the other community members leading it. I know actually a couple of them. So there was it was Thomas Stillings at the time, Mike Avery, and then Devin Martin. And I wanted to, like I said, I was right on the cusp of making it happen, but then this Dubai thing came up and I was still committed and interested. Dylan Gates was also in there. There's a lot of people actually, but Dylan Gates was mostly with me. And then the other guys were like free agents. We like hustled where we could, like in gymnastics gyms or something like that. But I wanted to bring us all together, But it made them feel a little bit unsure of my commitment to the Parkour SA project when I went to Dubai. Rightly so, right? I wasn't going to be there. And we also had like some bad Texas leaders in the beginning of the scene when me and Mike were super young, and we ended up kind of getting taken advantage of. It wasn't like nearly at all to the extent of like a easy styla type thing, but it was a similar thing, where we weren't given the information we wanted to be given. We were just told to trust and make it happen, and it actually, we shouldn't really have been trusting that much. So with all that wrapped up and with me leaving, they were like, okay, maybe Jeremy's just going to do another, MLW, Matthew Lee Willis thing, and take more money than he needs. And, we're just going to be screwed again, which is not at all what I wanted to do and not all what I did. Like I ran Parkour SA for a year remotely, and I only paid myself for like that hour of work that I did, like an admin that needed, and I gave everything else to the people that were coaching because that's what makes sense, right? But that being said, they went off and did their own Parkour SA thing. So when that first happened, or not Parkour SA, they opened Jump Flip Land, which is now like Parkour Ninjas, I think. But so that was like, I was definitely hurt in that moment because I would have completely understood if they were just telling me like, yo man, we don't think you're going to be able to be in it because you're there now. And I'd been like, okay, sweet, fair enough. Like go do your thing, like best of luck. But they didn't tell me anything about it. They just kind of did it, which is also the other thing, as being awkward like parkour people, we don't really know how to deal with potential conflict or have these tough conversations with people, right?
Yeah, and it's a parkour thing. It's a young person's thing, and it's just an experience, and sometimes it's, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's like you don't know what anyone's journey's on. Like with Stefan, it's like they could just be at that moment in their life, like where they're in their lowest, most critical, or like most difficult part of their journey, and it's just like you just don't really know what's going on with people. So it's hard to. It doesn't really serve yourself to do too much judgment about some people's behaviors. But anyhow.
Yeah, so it was easy in that moment, sadly, for me to get like upset about it and then treat it as like a personal attack. But when in reality, they had their own stuff going on. And obviously all of our inabilities to maybe fully express ourselves, it was just how it went, right? So like there's no bad blood now, thankfully. But it's one of those things where another lesson where it's like I realized a lot of the things that you might take personally honestly have nothing to do with you at all, and people most often hurt each other out of a lack of awareness than actual malice, right? Or never
willful. Ascribe a malice, I think, to where ignorance will suffice, or
yeah,
something like
exactly.
that. It's an old proverb of who knows who.
Yeah,
Confucius,
Socrates or something. Yeah, exactly. That might have been Marcus Aurelius, actually.
Marcus Aurelius. It would make more sense that it was him for that quote.
But so that like started my what's the wheels turning of like, okay, so maybe I'm not as welcome in San Antonio as I thought. And then I was also in another relationship at the time. I was kind of a bit of a serial monogamist, and had realized through the long distance that I still didn't really, in like just a human outside of parkour Jereme or teacher Jereme, know who I was, you know what I mean? Or the things that I had wanted to do. or the kind of person that I wanted to be aside. So I started kind of seeing, again, that not that I wasn't happy, but that I was um, just avoiding getting to know myself more, or like face my, in this case, like my childhood, like emotional demons or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Oh
It
yeah,
was
because it's a
easy.
coping mechanism, but
Yeah.
it's like eventually it's like, what are you escaping from? Are you turning away from? Yeah, that's so interesting the way you put that. I think that's very powerful. Knowing who you are outside of these other things, and like,
Yeah,
what do you
outside of your
really want?
relationship,
What kind of
outside
person
of,
you want to be? It's like, have you really even asked these questions of yourself recently?
yeah,
When was the
100%.
last time, if ever, you've asked these questions?
Exactly. And I realized I wasn't. I was just putting my energy into the relationship, you know what I mean, and being that unit, and then being the teacher, and being the parkour practitioner, being the community leader. But I started to understand that these are all actually things that I do. These really have nothing to do with who I am. And that's like when I started getting this realization in Dubai. And so I ended up, after my first year there, I broke up with my girlfriend at the time, and I sold all my parkour stuff in San Antonio to Parkour Ninjas. And I, fully committed to Dubai for like the next 2 years. So I was there 3 years total. And I think I made a lot of really, good connections there. One of my best friends, the guy that I work with, Explore Parkour now, is there. And I started I think that's where I started really seeing that, kind of as I had said, that we are all just human beings, and we do these things, but these things are not at all tied to who our identity is as a person. And that journey helped me see the being single and figuring all that kind of stuff out, and being in a completely new environment helped me see like these emotional and childhood traumas that I had not what's the word that I had not addressed, that I had not worked on, I had not even really been aware of. And it was a really funny thing, because those, in my perspective, ended up actually being one of the biggest keys for increasing my mental confidence game in parkour. So like I was never like one of the, if we were talking like mental game, I was always probably one of the least strong, you know what I mean, in that realm. Especially like when I went to Colorado for the second time, trained with Dylan Baker, and like his stomping grounds, seeing the stuff that he's doing, even seeing the stuff that you're doing, that Knox is doing, and being like, I am scared shitless of all of these things. And
there's been some, Dylan's mental game is ridiculous,
next level, something else for sure. But Colorado in general has like a lot of good beasts.
A lot of crazy shit has gone down.
Really
here,
strong mental game.
It's the air, man. I don't know. It's the thin air,
and then everything else backing it up, And I had obviously wanted that, but it wasn't something that I felt like, like, okay, to get stronger, that's easy. You just have to train correctly, eat correctly, rest well, and it can happen. Technical stuff, you're right, you can work on it, you can analyze, you can find people that are also good at that thing, and through that you can reach those. But that mental side of things, where it was like, where the fear was irrational, that was when it was like, okay, well, we don't really have a way to like help you with that. Yeah, if you have a rational fear, there's progressions, there's getting comfortable with the environment, there's getting comfortable with the skill, there's taking your time, there's ice breaking it, having somebody else do the move first, there's countdowns, there's numerous rituals that you can do that can help you commit to something that you are rationally afraid of. But I had realized that I had lots of irrational fears based on this fact that I still deep down inside thought like, since I was worthless, maybe I actually am not as good at this stuff as I could be. Plus, the only other way I can describe it is like some of the childhood trauma stuff that I had not addressed was like I had these open tabs in my brain. They were taking up processing power to accomplish these things that I did not realize. And so, like I said, I was single for a while, seeing just, how I would act aside from anybody else. I didn't have to
Mm-hmm.
worry about what a romantic, what anybody else would think. I could just do what I wanted, right? And so through this exploration, it didn't really change my actions as a person much, but it definitely made me feel unhindered to just, like, okay, well, I'm not gonna do that because, like, what's my
Yeah,
lady at
yeah.
home gonna think, right? You never had any. Since I took that out of the equation, I was able to start to see these things, and I ended up getting into meeting another really nice girl that I was not mentally or emotionally capable for, and I wanted to try like being casual, for example, even though I was a serial monogamist.
Mm.
And despite wanting to be casual and like light and not, heavy in the relationship, because she like ticked all the boxes in my head,
Mm.
my brain was like, get into a relationship with her, you know what I mean? And I realized like I could not control myself at all in this, and ended up kind of like being not overbearing, but like kind of clingy and smothering. And then, it was a super small amount of time. It was like 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks or something. But
Mm-hmm.
I realized, like, as this person who also considers like I have control over my emotions,
Mm.
I wouldn't consider myself a stoic, but like I definitely am interested in stoicism and Zen Buddhism and like this kind of like samurai bushido type thing from like Japanese jiu-jitsu and stuff. And with that, you're supposed to be someone who has control over themselves.
Yeah.
And realizing I had like this utter lack of control in this moment, um it was like another light bulb where it's like, oh, okay, so this is a weak point in your person that you have been avoiding. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's something, when I met this lady, it was like one of those moments where um I felt almost like if I was wandering in a desert and she was like an oasis, you know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
I just could not help myself. I was trying to drink as much of her as I could,
Mm-hmm.
because realizing I was still reliant on outside
Mm.
an external stimulus to give me validation, right? So I
Yeah.
still had this hole inside, and I was filling that with other people, with other things. And she was just one of those things that was like, that I was really, what was it? That I had felt that was missing in my life. You know what I mean? It
Mm-hmm.
was like, so obviously it's not the case. I feel bad that I like acted the way that I did in the relationship. And I understand if she like never forgives me for being like a clingy, weird, like douchebag after only knowing each other for 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
But thankfully, it was something that I realized where it's like, okay, I thought that I had this value of self. You know
Mm.
what I mean? But it was still like a wound that I, had been avoiding forever.
Mm.
So, seeing how strong that was, I was like, okay, I need therapy. And so it was through therapy that, like, the person, it wasn't anything, what is it called? It wasn't like any kind of crazy eureka moment, but it was just an understanding of like, there is training that can be done. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So I started getting back into meditation, which is something I started when I first did jujitsu,
Mm.
doing lots of journaling, and I went through BetterHelp to get uh, to get my therapy, because it was like the cheapest option,
Oh wow.
and it just worked for me. I've heard some bad things about it from some people,
Mm-hmm.
nothing like specific, but for me it was super helpful because I could just text them whenever I was having some kind of issues.
Mm.
They would talk, and like I think the biggest thing about it was not only giving these analysis strategies like the journaling, like the meditation, but also helping give names to the certain like coping mechanisms that I was going towards, whether
Mm.
it's like fatalism or like all or nothing thinking.
Mm.
And then once I realized that there was like, if I could ascribe how I was acting with a name, for example, like if you're doing a precision jump and you understand like, I undershot it or
Yeah.
overshot it, then if you know what undershooting and overshooting feels like, and you at least technically understand what that is, then that can help you find
The
that,
stick.
yeah, the
Yeah.
stick, exactly. So it was like that from like an emotional standpoint. So understanding then when I was maybe having a moment where I was getting fatalistic, or a moment when I was um, having expectations that were not voiced or met and realizing like that's unreasonable, right? To expect somebody to read my mind and know like how they should act. Once I started getting names and understanding what these things were through the therapy, then it was easy to be like, okay, I'm doing this right now, so I can actually not do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And there's a lot of
you
training.
can recognize it, and you need to be able to put a face on it sometimes. And
so that helped me a ton.
Yeah.
And then after putting face to it, it was also that allowed me to then like seek what was the root cause for me, right? And then seeing like, I still had like resentment with my mom because my mom was a great person, super loving. She did her best. But I realized like the things that she gave to me were things that she wanted for her childhood, right? Like, so she was super like hands off because she had a very overbearing mother in this case. But I actually would have appreciated more guidance, you know? And so realizing this, coming to like acceptance with that, talking with my mom, and like, you know, it's not even like a forgiveness thing, but like accepting and understanding like, you know, someone can do their best and have the best intentions and still mess up. You know, and we are all just human. Like there is no, you know, no mandated parenting course, and or even if there is, like every kid manifests their experiences differently or internalizes their experiences differently. And so, you know, going through this forgiveness, realizing and actually accepting that the things that I did go through were like fucked up and were not normal, and but that doesn't have to define me. And just because those bad things happen to me, it actually has no bearing on who I am as a human being, right? It's kind of like that cheesy, like, if you like crumple up $20, it's still $20. You know what I mean? So that then started helping me understand and get over through, not, like I said, not any realization. A lot of it's like training, right? Like I would have a negative thought. Okay, like this move, if it's parkour wise, like the stick is not perfect. You know what I mean? It's like 90% there, but I'll just focus on that 10%, right? That was not the way you wanted it. But then combating that with realizing actually, but there is all this other stuff you did good about it, you know? So I started then working towards seeing myself more objectively, I call it, you know, because we have moments where we see ourselves, or we see the situation as better than it is or worse than it really is. And when in reality, it's probably somewhere in the middle, right? We can only experience our life through our own perceptions, and through our own perceptions, like there's wavelengths, there's colors, there's many things that we have no idea that are going on right now, that are going on, can be potentially affecting
and your
us.
emotions, your moods are like a huge part of like how you interpret the experience, right?
Exactly. And that's just, the emotions are just one tool. It is not the truth. Our experiences are just one tool with which we can perceive the world. It is not the truth, right? And so this, for whatever reason, then got me into that mode. And then once I started feeling like I was like accepting these things in my life, I felt like my mental game was going like way, way, way up. It's still, I don't feel like I'll ever be, not that I necessarily want to be at like a Dylan Baker level or anything like that, but it helped me change and shift and see that, you know, there are ways to address pretty much any kind of thing, irrational fears, rational fears. And it gave me like another tool in not only my own personal toolkit for navigating this life, but also, you know, for teaching as well. You know what I mean? Because I think it is like the parkour mindset, right? There's so many different ways to overcome an obstacle, and the obstacle to overcome might not even be the one that is actually like in front of you, or the one that you think it is. Another funny like training specific example I had that gave me this was trying to do a simple thing, just increase my max broad jump. You know, I had always been, I think it was like under 9 feet. I would be like an 8.5 foot broad jump. And then I got to where I was 9. I was like, okay, I want to get a 10-foot broad jump. And I mean 10 feet, not 10 steps like parkour people like to do. Us Americans, we measure stuff.
Hey, my foot is exactly 12 inches. So don't worry about it.
So I like that differentiation of steps versus feet, because freedom units, you know. But anyway, so and I was thinking, okay, I've need to be stronger to jump further. So like hit the weights. Like I got to where I was doing 2.5 body weight squats. I could do 3.25 body weight deadlift, and
Damn, that's ridiculous.
And my broad jump didn't get much bigger. I got to like 9.5 or something like that.
Oh wow.
And then the other weird thing about it is the consistency of my broad jump was not that great. Like on a really good fresh day, I could hit 9.5, but even if I wasn't perfectly fresh, it was like back to like 8.5, or like at the best, maybe 8-10 or something. And then I started thinking like, okay, so what's the problem? Like, this is weird to be having that much of a
volatile.
Yeah, exactly. To have that much of a range. And I, at that time, which was years ago, I mean, the timelines were jumping around a lot, but this was like, I don't know, maybe 2010 or something like that, maybe 2012. I started getting more into mobility, so like yoga and things like that, and realizing like, okay, well, this is actually something that I haven't been addressing at all. I could only squat flat-footed if I had a hell of a lot of weight on my back. And that's not, and like, you know, someone like you, especially, you have beautiful like mobility in your ankles and your like squat and stuff like that.
Didn't really do too much for it, but I appreciate that.
But it's good. I mean, but the thing is, you probably kept it. You know what I mean? Like, there's many kids that can do that kind of stuff, and you know, we can lose it, right? Barring someone being outside the normal aberration. But anyway, so then I started working on my mobility, and realizing that through that, I don't need to just work on strength to get the gains, you know what I mean? Through getting better ankle dorsiflexion, through, you know, getting a more flexible low back, through having better range with my arms, and I always forget which one it is, but you know, with the range behind your body, I think it's flexion or something like that. Yeah, I always forget with the shoulders. But anyway, but being able to get my arms right behind me and all that kind of stuff, I was able to then get a consistent 9 foot 10 inches. Sadly, never got the 10 foot, but
that's impressive though. Heel to toe or toe to heel or whatever. That's fucking far, especially for someone of your, you know, build. It's not like that's like, if we never talk about body size, like height, or maybe it's wingspan to like ratio, but that's like, it's a big jump.
Yeah, I was a little dude, 5'6". I mean, I am a little dude still, and so it was awesome for me to be able to do that. But that, again, was another thing of like, okay, maybe the path is not always as like straightforward as we want it to believe it to be.
Yeah.
And I think, especially from like a mobility standpoint, if we're thinking with training with parkour, it is probably the thing that is missing the most from most parkour athletes. You know, I think strength training is pretty normalized nowadays, but I don't see that many people that are actually taking their mobility training seriously as well.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it can be way simpler than a lot of people think, you know, like it doesn't have to be, I'm taking a dedicated hour like 2 or 3 times a week, but even I think basic weighted stretching can do a lot of good for, you know, a lot of parkour athletes, because it's that stress under load that is then neuromuscularly telling our, you know, body that it's okay to be in this range and we can use this. Rather than just the normal, you know, classic old school passive stretching type stuff that people like to think that mobility is, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, and that frontier is still a little bit evolving. I mean, everything's
100%.
always evolving a little bit. So I was listening to David Weck and Tim on Tim Sheaf's got a little podcast. I don't know if you kept up with him at all, but David Weck is like somebody he started following, and he was talking about how power is, in his kind of theory, this concept he has is balance over strength or something to that degree. It's like that is the equation for how you get power. And so and balance is measured in a way where that number, you want it to get as small as possible. And of course, strength as big as possible, so that you have like ideally, you know, a fraction of or less than 1 in the numerator position, and then like the biggest number possible. That's the most power you could have. You know, lots of strength, but also the ability to apply that strength. And he was talking about exactly what you're talking about, which is balance is really, the way he defines it, is such a broad, you know, range of motion, being able to coil and like throw yourself all the way, and being able to like use every muscle in the chain. Like, these things can super dramatically, and basically what he's saying, to kind of echo what you're saying right now, is just like, even if your strength is super good, or rather, for him, he's a 50 or 60 something year old man. He's like, my gains are still improving, even though there's no way I'm ever going to put up more weight than I used to be able to. But if I can increase these other factors, I actually can get more power, even at,
Yeah, 100%.
ages that don't make sense. But that's neither here nor there. I think that, yeah, this is just amazing.
We're bouncing around a lot.
You're bouncing. I'm bouncing. This is a big problem for me. I bounce all around when I'm talking on podcasts. But what I think that might be a nice segue into is like, okay, well, you are doing this new thing, Parkour Explore, Explore Parkour. And I checked out the website. It's really cool. And I think it's so interesting talking to you now, because the website and the way you've structured everything, it actually, like, even before this conversation, I was like, wow, he like thinks so deeply and differently, and like very, just, it's so comprehensive, the way you've approached the instruction of parkour and what people can learn, how they can learn it. And so would you go into that project? Like, how did that project maybe come to be from where we left off? And then
for sure,
what's that about, and where are you going with it?
So it must have been around 2018 or 2019. So I was still working in Dubai with ParkourDXB. Things were going good. We had a nice team at the time, but I started seeing, it must have been 2018, but I started realizing that I often, as a parkour coach, I mean, I'm doing that right now here, right, with Coil Outside. We just want coaches on the ground, right? Like that's how, if you're a coach, that's how you make money, teaching people. Like there are, head coach positions maybe that are slightly more managerial and stuff, but predominantly, the business model is, if you want to make money for your gym, you need students. To get students, you need a coach, right? And so we were coaching a ton, and I had felt like my value would be better served if I could create something that then other teachers could use. Is how I guess it exactly started. And it kind of was also like, what kind of resource would I wish that I had when I started training? Like, I remember back in the day seeing like Club 540 for like tricking tutorials and stuff, and there was another gymnastics one that was called like Skills and Drills or something, and it would show you in the gymnastic system, right, which is like there's A, B, C, D, or E difficulty skills, and you would just click on the skill and see like a GIF of the move, and then from there, you could go like, it was just basic enough to see it, so it didn't really help you that much. But from seeing stuff like that when I first started and being a bit inspired, and also realizing that there was not really something out there like what I would want if I was getting into parkour now and was interested in teaching or even just training, right? And so it started off as wanting to create this resource. I wanted to do it under the ParkourDXB banner at the time, but it was one of those things where, it's not that easy for a parkour gym to be making enough money to make big investments into other types of projects, right?
Yeah, margins are thin.
Yeah, exactly.
On parkour, paper thin, because of the freaking space you need is so ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. And so, obviously, and rightly so, that was not something that they could pay me to do, right? And with my teaching schedule, it was also something that was hard for me to keep as more than just an idea. The second thing that I saw with being in Dubai is seeing how big the parkour community really is, and how underserved all of the actual non-English speaking community is, so you saw around that time, FIG coming around, the Gymnastics Federation trying to take parkour under their wing, but not really respect the community that much in the way that they did it. Most of the people that did try to get into it, I think Pasha, Sasha, I think there's others I can't remember, but they tried and then they left because they saw how like it still seems sketchy and more like a cash grab than anything else. But the other thing that you saw Fig doing is they were going straight into like Azerbaijan or some other country that you know we don't know. I don't even know where that is on the map. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I didn't know that. What was the country you just said?
Yeah, exactly. So as like a Westerner, we just don't have that awareness of it. But there's 100% parkour people there that have just as much passion as us, but because their first language is not English, they're completely limited in what is right now the worldwide community. You know what I mean? So seeing that interest in parkour at a worldwide scale when being in Dubai, and also seeing that there was this empty resource, I started dreaming up what is now Explore Parkour, and it started off really just as trying to think of how would I teach it, and if someone were to want to learn from me, how could I get all the knowledge that I have in here out in a way that's not gonna just like confuse somebody or overwhelm
No, that's
somebody.
what's so cool about it. Yeah, that's what I noticed. That's what you reminded me of just now, is like it's so rich, but it's so accessible and approachable at the same time. And it's like kind of I love the name because it's so in tune with like how you can approach the website is you just go explore a little bit.
Yeah.
Like literally go explore parkour because and that way I love it because it engages them to make their own choices, and kind of like already they're not just sitting there passively, because that's not really a great way to learn for most people anyways. It's just like, okay, dictate to me, please.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like they're engaged, they're deciding, where their interests are, but as far as they want to go, they can keep zooming in for quite a while before they hit any barrier, and you're not even like fully fleshed out yet in that website.
Yeah, exactly. So the biggest barrier to creating this thing was that I have zero web design experience or anything like that. So that was I think it was 3 years before we actually had a website that looked at least basically how I would want it to look. And obviously same thing, margins are low. I'm not saving up a ton of money like as a parkour teacher. So it was it was a bootstrap project. I'm just learning as I can, running into mostly web design type errors and errors, and
it's
trying
a fucking nightmare in a minefield, man, dude. I do that stuff sometimes for my work, and
it's a super legitimate skill that is like that you need training, training,
and it's expensive as fuck if you actually want to pay someone to do it, because it is that hard
exactly
to develop.
So thankfully there are things though like website builders and stuff like that, but even that's not for the extent that I want to do, like a Squarespace or something like that. That's built for you to be like, okay, hey, buy my stuff or do this kind of thing. But we are trying to create, me and my friend Pedro, this all-encompassing resource that is like aiming to be essentially like a Wikipedia of parkour. Anything that you would want to know, you can find there. And so the basic of it is understanding there's technical content, physical content, conceptual content, and through that, those three main trees is how you can develop your parkour skills. And in each technical page, for example, it will show relevant physical exercises that you could use if you wanted to further develop that. And physical exercises, not just in the building strength realm, but also in the mobility realm, right? You can increase your precision jump, not just by developing your precision jump technique, but also by increasing your strength in your posterior chain or increasing your mobility, No,
I love it, man. It's so, it's all right. I don't want to cut you off, but it really, you just keep reminding me, because I wrote some notes down when I was looking over it, and I wanted to give you some feedback, and I kind of forgot where I even put the notes, but I'll get them for you. They're right here.
Yeah, for sure.
But you just reminded me of them, like, wow, you can just like, it's like you get a window into a real parkour practitioner's mind that's been doing it for how long?
Almost
like
20
almost
years
20
now.
years.
Yeah.
And it's like, holy shit. Like I don't know if they'll have the same experience I do, because obviously I'm a longtime practitioner as well. So I can really see what's there. And I'm like, this is so good, because like, this is like how it takes so long to learn all this, but it's just kind of like you're experiencing it by going through the website. So
Yeah. So
sorry, just
no, it's great. I'm super. I mean, this is cool for me because I don't get to get a lot of feedback on it. So I'm glad that you saw it and you dig it. Obviously, like I think right now we only have like 2 patrons on it, and they're just friends of mine, but they believe in it as well. You know what I mean? And so that's part of it, right? To show these 3 aspects of it and the connections that each of those have, and like the kind of the Explore Parkour way to kind of come back to what that even means to me is like I kind of thought hard about what is like the cycle of progress, right? And what is like even the purpose of me training parkour at this point in my life. And it's kind of for me a way to express myself, and that's what any kind of art form is, right? And I definitely think parkour is 100% an art for me, just as much as it is a sport, right? And the idea in my mind of what an art is to be able to have that internal visualization of what you want to express and then be able to then create that in the real world. So the cycle that I kind of have, first, to even understand what you want to express, you need to be aware of that, right? So awareness is the first part of the cycle of progress. Then the second is preparation. So once you become aware of your strengths and your struggles, then you can start to prepare accordingly towards your goals, right? And then after that, then comes the adaptation, through the preparation, then you adapt and change. Or if it's, parkour, maybe you have to physically adapt in whatever happens if you mess it up, right? And then after the adaptation comes the progress, right? And then it cycles back into it there. The more you progress, the more you're able to become aware of your strengths and your struggles, just like the whole emotional and mental stuff that we were talking about. I'm obviously it's all just conjecture, but I'm fairly sure I would not have had the like epiphanies that I had in Dubai if I had not had the epiphanies that I had in those past moments, when I was suicidal and stuff like that. So it's like this cycle that then leads to a deeper level of being able to express yourself, right? It's the same thing when, if you're dealing with a kid, or even as we're talking right now, right? Like we only have the vocabulary that we have, and if we want to express ourselves better, we need to develop our vocabulary. But we not just learn a new word, but we need to like make that word a part of us so that we can actually, share that with someone. And even if I used a word that you wouldn't know, if I had enough of a mastery of that word, you would be able to feel, not just with the technical aspect of how I'm pronouncing it, but also the intention, the energy that I put into that word, and I think of that as like how I treat like the parkour like side of it as far as my training and for my teaching. So
that is amazing. Wow, that's so powerful. I love that you think so deeply about it, and I'm gonna have to listen to that section again just to fully, because that was juicy, and I totally get it. I feel like I resonated with every bit of that, and at the same time, I'm just like I just want to sit on it because it was like, yeah, man, expressing yourself. I mean, that Bruce Lee quote comes to mind. There's that famous interview with Bruce Lee where he's like talking about how it's so hard to actually express yourself honestly, and mastery in martial arts and stuff. Ultimately, they point down into this kind of main vein of just like, what is it I'm doing? And self-expression ultimately is sort of one of the biggest answers to that question. Yeah. And one of the hardest, but like also the most rewarding and most infinite goals you can keep working towards. Is there just better refinement of that?
Yeah, and it starts off real small, right? Like I think for me, parkour was the thing when I started to realize what my capabilities were and how to express myself, right? But I was still, socially awkward, didn't know how to talk with people.
And you find those limits too, like along the way.
Yeah.
Which like pivot, make you like, it's a maze in a way, and you just kind of like, oh, I hit a wall here, so I guess I got to find a new way to express myself. And eventually you start building all these skills, and all of a sudden you get to this meta layer of self-expression, and then there's another one. or
Yeah.
deeper. I don't know which way you go.
No, exactly. Yeah. So that's the 100% the idea of that yeah, adaptation and progression, and that's just how it goes, right? But so that is like the intention with the website, right? Inside it, there's also games and stuff that we use to try to teach the concepts, because a concept is something like, exactly as you said, I can tell you what the concept is, and you can understand it from a cognitive level, but to start to integrate that concept into your bones, right?
Yeah,
Into
embody it, or
exactly,
yeah.
to embody that, it takes certain experiences, and there's definitely experiences that we've probably had that are not legal nor reasonable to expect a young kid to be able to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But there are ways that we can help give them similar eureka moments that we had that were instrumental in our growth as parkour practitioners and as human beings. And so the games are not only an aspect of that, but also a reintroduction into the fact that play is like a natural part of humans and a natural part of actually any kind of like animal, right? We're animals, any kind of existence on this earth. If you look at lions with their cubs, if you look at anything, like, to develop the skills that are necessary to navigate the world, like, play is one of the best ways to develop that as well. And I just as much as like the next practitioner love and understand and want and would want my students to find joy in like the hard style of training or just putting out some reps of a technique. But this is a certain aspect, this is just one way to be able to train, right? If I was only able to, do good research, if I was listening to heavy metal, then this is like a limitation that I can keep if I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
But if I want to, be able to expand beyond that, then I need to train in a different way, right? This was a funny thing that I had with Jesse after a long time, where him and I were both of the kind where we would step up to any kind of challenge, you know what I mean? And at a certain point, I started feeling like the real challenge actually is for us to not accept this challenge because that's become our habit, and this is not always something that's going to serve us in our goals to do every single challenge that goes, right?
Oh man, love that.
It's kind of like a funny example would be like the Yes Man movie, right? From like Jim Carrey. Like he was a no man and then he went the complete opposite direction, and also realized that that's not exactly the best way either.
Yeah.
And so, you have to find the middle way. But so that was like the bedrock for, I guess, Explore Parkour. And then the second piece of it was realizing not only that parkour itself as a community has a hard time really coming together. You know what I mean? Like I only have my American perspective. I don't know really how things are in Europe, sadly. I haven't got to train or explore much there, but I'm sure you know how things happened with, like, what was it, like the North American Parkour Association or something like that. There was a national governing body that tried to start. There was at least one, maybe two. I think now there's like Parkour Earth or something like that. But
there's Parkour Earth, and then there's an American parkour organization that is making some moves right now.
Okay, yeah, I think I've seen it. I know Cozy's there.
Cozy is the he was on actually like 2 episodes or something.
Nice, yeah, I think I saw that one. So like, this is sadly something that people tried to do at least a decade ago. Yeah, maybe less than, but around there. But because I don't know, because the people involved were not in a place to meaningfully compromise or to meaningfully work together. Everybody maybe had a little bit too much, you can't say if it's ego or what it is, but either way, people were not working together well enough to actually come together, you know, and make something happen. There's been the Parkour UK for a long time. Australia's had a long time national governing body, but the US just was never able to pull the trigger on this kind of thing for whatever reason with the people involved. Thankfully it seems to be happening now, but I think this is like this is one of the things that I feel would have been a good not weapon, but a good tool to use when Fig has started to do its thing, trying
Yeah.
to take parkour. So that's where realizing that since everything is in English, I would like my resource, our resource, me and Pedro's resource, Explore Parkour, to be uh, translated into as many different languages as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So my friend Pedro Bessa, he's a longtime practitioner in Brazil. Met him because he started working in Dubai as well. Ended up becoming one of my best friends because one of the nice things as I started like working on my mental development is that I started feeling like I could then actually have meaningful relationships with people,
Mm.
and be open to that kind of thing. But with him, he's working not only on developing content alongside with me because from working with me for 2 years or now like 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
he understands the vision that how I want Explore Parkour to be, and he digs it as well, and he sees that as like, the positive influence that it can be. Thankfully, he has the understanding of English, and and he speaks Portuguese as his native language. So he's been able to translate most of the site, I think all of it, into Portuguese. And as we continue developing Explore Parkour, he'll be alongside doing that. We have 2 other contacts that are working in Dubai right now that will be working on us with the Spanish translations and the Arabic translations. I currently also have some friends in Turkey, Iranian friends that are going to start, that I would like to have them start on like Farsi translations. And obviously I know a little bit of Turkish. My wife speaks Turkish. The Turkish translation is like a next high priority item for me too, since that's something that I want to help develop since I'm living in Turkey, right? It's going to be nice to help get the knowledge out there. And so, yeah, anybody also listening to this podcast, if you speak any other languages and are interested in helping out with XP, that's like totally a big realm that we could need and want, as far as just trying to get the knowledge out. Because I think also as like a poor person, from coming from a poor background, seeing the barriers to entry into academics, for example, seeing how things like community colleges were seen as like less than like a state college or some of the Ivy League places, and feeling like there's these class barriers that don't really need to exist, trying to again like display in-depth parkour information in a digestible way, easily digestible way, but also in as many different languages as possible, so that English doesn't have to be a barrier to entry. You know what I mean? You don't have to have a sports science background to at least learn a precision jump or something like that. Obviously, anything that you want to take deeper, like there should be a point at which, Explore Parkour or even a coach is, just a helpful thing, but not a necessary thing, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't want any of our students to be reliant on us for the entirety of their lives, right? We want to make free thinking human beings that can, make good decisions for themselves and hopefully make the world like a better place, right? And so even though I'm just a lowly parkour teacher, like Explore Parkour is my passion project into trying to, give my skill set back to the world and hopefully help, raise the level up of everybody.
Yeah, man. Absolutely incredible. I think you're doing amazing things with it. I hope that lowly parkour teacher is not any of that self-worth issue coming up again.
No, but it's
teasing you, but yeah, no, I think it's amazing. I think that's really cool, and I think all the reasons you guys have put together, it's so well thought out, and I definitely encourage people to check it out and reach out to you if they feel like they can help.
Yeah, for sure. Sharing it. I mean, we will always have some of the resources for free, like a percentage of it. And as we start creating more content that we right now, because we don't, honestly, it's a passion project and I haven't thought enough, I'm sure, about how to market it. We're
Mm.
just going the Patreon route. We didn't want to
Nothing
get
better than
ads.
word of mouth, baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Spread it around.
But yeah, sharing it, utilizing the free content, and then if you're able and interested, becoming a patron, is something that are all ways to obviously help us. Helping with translations, feedback is always great too, because I'm not a web designer.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, there's so many things you got to pull together. So, but I definitely, it's so cool. This is such a powerful resource for anyone who wants to, or already is in parkour or wants to teach it.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool. Unless you want to say any more on that, I have one last thing I want to ask, and then we can maybe put a bow on this discussion,
I
because
think that's
you
good.
mentioned your wife. And I think there's been an interesting kind of like thread about like the women in your life and how you've had different lessons and stuff learned along the way.
Yeah.
What was it, now that you're in this new place, you're married, and how did that happen? And where are you at now that you're in this healthy, loving relationship?
Yeah. I like if you're just listening to this,
She's
if you're
kicking back now, like, let's go.
Yeah, if you're just listening to this, he had to look over at her to make sure to choose his words wisely before he goes into it. No, I think as is natural, we see what is around us in the media, in our personal lives, in our family lives, and we then begin to assimilate that as what our perspective of anything needs to be. In this case, we're talking about a relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we see what's on TV, we see what's on the media, we see what's in our own personal experiences, our family, our friends, etc. And I think the biggest positive shift from my old way of thinking of relationships to where I'm at right now is, in the past, for me, it was one of those, okay, you need to find someone that completes you.
Yeah, the Jerry Maguire.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a deep cut for some people.
And so this, from my perspective, it doesn't serve my own personal goals, and it's not a healthy thing for me to think of myself as not a full human being.
Yeah,
unless
the old paradigm is sort of codependency, and like that was romance back in the day.
Exactly. So, and realizing that I am a complete, human being just as I am, and to not have the relationship be the meaning to my life, but have it be the addition to my life. Finding somebody that I can not only share my successes with, but my struggles with, while not foisting my successes or struggles upon them for some kind of external validation or problem solving or something like that. More of like a teammate versus, my problems are your problems kind of person. Mm-hmm. So when I started...
An appendage.
Yeah, exactly. Like another, like a tool to use, or a selfish, the selfish kind of love. Like, so now the way that I think of it, my friend had a really good example, Paul Graves, where he was like, okay, a lot of people like to think of a good relationship as like two columns that are like leaning against each other, and through that, miracle of counterbalance, are able to build something on top of. But this is not a strong foundation, right? And so through trying to just be my own strong column, you know what I mean? And obviously nobody's perfect. Like, I'm sure there's still going to be realizations that I have years from now where I'm like, oh, okay, this was another blind spot that I had, and that can happen even in something as simple as, like, I'm sure my precision tech can get better, but I'm also sure like my emotional like stability can get better. I'm sure I can get more empathic. I'm sure I can, increase my awareness and those kinds of things. So, but by being on this journey to be my own complete human being and not making that anybody else's responsibility, it's then allowed me to feel like I can have a healthy relationship with another person that is on a similar path, So my wife, I can say your name, you don't mind? Okay, cool. With Selene,
consent.
yeah,
that's
exactly.
important in a healthy relationship.
Exactly. with Selene, the cool thing is like we both are interested in our own things and want to have our own lives and share those things with each other. We also get along from, the only way I can kind of describe it is like from a chemical point of view. Like our personal struggles don't interact in an explosive way with each other's, right? So like if someone has severe abandonment issues, and this other person just doesn't like, to be on their phone a lot, that can be a struggle that then exacerbates each other's personal struggles, right? But so thankfully Selene and I we've sorted out any of the things for the most part that we have in that realm, and so we're able to live our lives, share our successes and our struggles with each other, while working towards not making it the other person's problem, not making the other person's responsibility to make me happy or to solve my problems. And then sometimes it's actually the other way around, like maybe we can be too independent, and so having somebody that we can start to be more comfortable sharing more with as well, and so it was just one of those things when we met. Another thing, like I had been in some relationships that didn't work out so well, and I knew immediately like I had a super strong connection with her, but I didn't know what that meant yet, and I didn't want to force that into being like, okay, that means we should be in a romantic relationship. Maybe it means we would have been just like amazing friends or whatever, I didn't want to force it into any one box, because I have already leapt into things like that before looking
like
and
I've done
realizing,
that and it doesn't go well.
Yeah, exactly. And so
I'm going to look at it more objectively again.
So from, moving a little bit slower in the beginning than maybe I might normally, it helped me realize that this is actually somebody that is on a similar path of personal progression, just trying to like do their best in the world. And I would I would be honored, honestly, to have them in my life to share those things, and we had our own struggles and troubles too. For example, like I still had to deal from getting back into a relationship. I realized there were still self-worth based things that had to do with like infidelity that I was insecure about. But thankfully, I know it did still affect her negatively, but we were able to overcome it, and I was at least logically, even though emotionally maybe I was freaking out, logically able to be like, I know this is not your problem. I know I'm freaking out, and I know it's like freaking you out, but this is actually like nothing to do with you. I just have to get over this feeling that like I that I can trust you, to be honest. And even if you were sleeping with somebody else or doing something like that, it actually has no bearing on my value as a human being, which is something that
I'm okay, you're okay policy.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a random dude, a homeless dude that came up to me one time. He was telling me about this brilliant like psychologist. He's like, and his whole thing was, I'm okay, you're okay. And I'll never forget that. It was so great.
Yeah, and it's exactly that. So, having these realizations in the beginning, being able to navigate these struggles well with one another, and also just being willing to own up to our own mistakes, and just try to still be true to ourselves, but do also, honor the other person and their goals and what they want to do, So she knew immediately, I think, that she wanted to marry me.
Oh, snap.
But it took me a little bit of time.
Him.
Yeah, exactly. But it took me a little bit of time to come to this, but realize like, yeah, this is totally somebody that I would love to, spend the rest of my life with, and, continue learning who I am, continue learning who she is, and also continue learning, what that means for us together. So I don't think of it necessarily like we completed each other, but we are walking the same direction in our path of life, and we're able to hold hands and share while we do it, kind of thing.
Beautiful stuff. I love it. Very cool. Thank you for sharing all of that, man. You've been so honest and just forthcoming with everything today. It's been like, I think it's so cool I love it. Like, it's really powerful. I think it really is going to help. It helped me. It helps. I think it'll help listeners navigate some of these things that you've done. And I think it's so awesome to see just like your journey. Like, what an incredible journey you've already been on. And it's so clear that you've like really done like, you know, the work, as people call it. You done the work. And like, it's just like so cool though.
Yeah.
So I'm like, wow, man. That maturation process is not easy. And I think it's like commendable for, you know, to see like how you've gone through some of these things and where you're at now and what you're offering with XP. I like XP just even as a like
gaining some XP.
Get that XP, baby.
Exactly.
Explore Parkour. That'll be for sure. I'll mention it on both ends of the episode. I do an intro and an outro, but still, like, you know, go in the description right now, I think, and check that out.
Yeah, no,
it's been such a pleasure to have you on, bro.
Yeah, thanks, dude. Yeah, it's been super good too. And I mean, I think like just to touch on like as far as that honesty thing, I think that's one interesting aspect of like we create these traditions, right? Like, and there are these taboos that are like our culture has, like asking about our salaries, for example, is like a big taboo, right? Or as a man, we're not supposed to like express our feelings, right? If I were to compliment you, maybe the natural way would for me to actually like make a degrading joke about that.
Yeah, talk shit to me. That's exactly how men express their love in many cultures.
And so I think one of the most influential books I read recently, like a lot of obviously I really liked a lot of Eastern philosophy, samurai, Bushido, Zen Buddhism type stuff when I was younger, but the Flow book by, I really wish I could pronounce his last name, but it's Mihaly like something. I'm not even going to try. But he is the first psychologist that really coined the term flow, I believe. And the flow state is what you know this is referencing. It's a book totally, if you're at all interested in flow state, that you should read. And one of the cool things that is in the book are these certain different anthropological studies where he sees how conducive to flow state different cultures are. For example, he talks about a tribe where if your back is turned to the person, or if you're going into the woods, essentially like the people in the wood, or the spirits in the forest, can be, you know, doing bad things to you or putting bad ideas into the heads of the people back in the tribe. And I'm probably butchering the story, but the essential idea of it is that that culture was not conducive to flow at all, because it always put them in a high alert state when it was not necessary. Yeah, exactly.
That's the giant tab open all the time.
Exactly. And so I think through that book, it helped me really like try to look back at my life and the things and the certain traditions or mores that I just assumed is like the way things are, right? And if that thing is not serving me, and if that is not going to serve another person, to show that there can be another example. Like it's okay to be honest about these things. And thankfully this stuff is getting way more common to talk about. You know what I mean? You can see lots of good positivity made with like, you know, men actually being able to compliment each other and not being, you know, some kind of weird homophobic thing, or you have to be super aggressive or something like that. So retraining and, you know, taking what we were taught in the cultures we were raised, and it's just like the Bruce Lee thing, like taking what is useful, discarding what's useless, and then, you know, create your own culture. You know what I mean? And give people the power and the space to create their own. You know, because the way that I'm living my life, I know 100% is not the way that others would want to live theirs, but I would implore them to at least question and see which ways they are not actually living their life, but that their life is being lived for them from their past, from their external influences, from their friends, their peers, their family, from the culture of the place that they were born in. And so that they can more lucidly choose and lucidly live the way that they want, you know, start taking steps towards that. Because I think that's the goal, right? Like to be happy. And a lot of the things we take for granted, the things that we think are just ways that the world is and has to be, we actually have the power to change that, you know, if not for ourselves, but through time, you know, like we can have a huge impact if we support each other in finding our own personal power and happiness and find the things that give us that flow state, right? As long as those things aren't like murdering each other or something like that.
Yeah, it's tough when like someone they have. Yeah, it takes a certain awareness, like you're saying, and like awareness doesn't come easy, and it has to like be actually embodied sometimes before it's useful. But yeah, I feel like the world's in pretty good hands with dudes like you running around out here, and it's definitely a part of our generation. I think, like you said, these things are coming up more, and like you said, we have the power, and it's certainly as us as in our early 30s now, it's starting to get to that time where the world is going to come more and more under our guardianship or like lead or whatever. I don't know what you want to use, but responsibility is like being handed down always. People are dying, so I think it's cool to see that evolution embodied in you. And yeah, man, I'm so pumped for everyone to listen to this. So yeah, jump in that description, check out all the links, and thank you, Jereme Sanders.
Sweet.
On
Thank
today's
you,
episode.
dude. Yeah, it was lovely.
Everybody going through their
Woo! All right. That's what's up. This was episode 113. Jereme Sanders, keeping it real like that on the mic in our Height Drop studio. Thank you guys for being a part of it, listening, doing all the things that you do in the description, like subscribe, like things, comment, and review. Write and review. I want you to turn redneck and then rate and review on that iTunes and Spotify, if you know what I mean. Know what I'm saying? You get a little piece of wheat in your mouth and then just rate and review. 5 stars, because that's all you know how to do. Yeah. You know how I like to get a little weird at the end of the episode. I hope you guys have a great 4th of July. Parkour History episode 4 is coming out, so be prepared for that, and make sure you go follow Jereme's Explore Parkour project through the description, and his stuff on Instagram and wherever else you can find him. Until next time.